Good morning and welcome to the BBA's webinar channel, where we discuss the latest issues impacting and affecting banks and regulated firms alongside subject matter experts in their field. My name is Philip Allen. I'm the Director of Learning at the BBA, and today for the next hour to discuss Are You Missing a Trick? Your People Are Your Most Effective Defense Against Cyber Attacks. I'm delighted to be joined this hour by Nick Wilding, General Manager Cyber Resilience of Axelos Global Best Practice, and Vicky Gavin, Compliance Director and Head of Information Security at The Economist Group. Just before I hand over to Nick, you can participate in this webinar in two ways. Number one, by asking questions. If you have a question for the presenters, you can ask a question at any time simply by clicking on the Ask a Question button on your screen, which is located underneath the presentation. Please note that when you ask a question, your name or your organization is not disclosed to any other webinar attendees. Number two, we'd also like to invite you to participate in our Ask the Question or Ask the Audience polls. To participate in the polls, a pop-up box with a question will appear on your screen. Simply answer the question in the box and click OK. We intend to present for 40 minutes and then answer your questions for the remaining 20 minutes. Nick, over to you.
Many thanks, Phil, and thank you, everyone. Delighted to have the opportunity of talking to you today with Vicky. Firstly, some very brief introductions. I'm Nick Wilding, General Manager of Cyber Resilience at Axelos. If you don't know who Axelos are, we are a joint venture between UK government and Capita. We own and nurture global best practice, full portfolio, including ITIL and Prince2, which you may well have heard of. And over the last 2 years, I've been working to design, launch, and now manage new cyber resilience best practice, which we've called Resilia. So I'm delighted to be talking to you today with Vicky, a close friend and colleague. She's the Compliance Director and Head of InfoSec at The Economist Group and shares the same passion and dedication that I have. We have at Resilia around the importance of people in your defense against cyber attacks. Purpose of this morning's presentation, twofold really. One is to present some of the challenges the majority of organizations face in effectively managing their cyber risks. But clearly we want to focus on the power of the human factor, the people, everyone that works for us, and to provide some lessons and some ideas in making your people your most cost-effective defense against cyber attacks. So, moving on, Houston, we have a problem. It's clear that we live in a massively hyper-connected world now, and the opportunities facing all organizations and typically all banks are incredible in becoming more cost-efficient, getting to market more quickly, communicating more effectively with customers, et cetera, et cetera. But the hard reality is that same environment is one that constantly threatens the information that's most precious to us and the organizations we work for. So hard-won reputations, competitive advantage, and our operational capabilities are all vulnerable, and banks now need to be much more alive to the dangers and resiliency of attacks when they inevitably come. It's clear that investment in cybersecurity technologies continues to increase, but at the same time, the scale, the scope, and the number of cyber attacks also continues to increase. There appears to be something missing in our response to the growing cyber risks we face. And the thing is, the majority of successful cyber attacks succeed because of human error, the unwitting actions, typically, of anyone in the organization, regardless of their role or responsibility. These can have potentially catastrophic consequences. And as a result, I would suggest that we need to recognize that cyber resilience is fundamentally a human and not just a technology issue. I often say that all too often cyber attackers find it easier to influence and engage our own people than we do. And to address this, we need to change the behaviors across the organization, providing all our people from the boardroom through the specialist InfoSec teams and across all other areas of the business with the simple, relevant, practical guidance we all need to make the right decisions at the right time in face of a whole range of different cyber risks that we face. Sorry, I went one slide too many there. Okay, so
first question that we have is, what statement best describes your information security awareness learning program for all staff? So what statement best describes your information security awareness learning program for all staff? If you'd just like to choose one of the answers there. We'll just publish the results very shortly. It'll come up in the pop-up screen. Vicky, Nick, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've got to say, from my organization, regular short learning campaigns and refreshers throughout the year. I find learning is not something that you can load on the front end. People need to be learning and relearning constantly throughout the year, throughout their lives.
And to add to that, Vicky, I absolutely countenance that. And I think the sad truth is that many organisations we still find are carrying out their once-a-year e-learning. To expect that actually to have an impact on behaviours, which is what we're talking about, is completely unrealistic. And the sad truth is that, as I say, the majority of organisations still do that across all industries, and I think there's a great area of improvement that could be made very cost-effectively by organisations to adopt this more productive approach.
I agree with you, Nick. I think an awful lot of organizations focus on being able to produce a statistic for the regulators rather than actually changing the behaviors of their staff.
Absolutely, Vicky. So moving on, the next slide. We wanted to start with sort of providing outlining a trusted and informed synopsis of the cyber risks we face. The Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, the ICAW, produce regular audit insight reports about cyber. And here's an overview of their latest report. Vicky, it's clear to me that many of the points raised on this slide probably haven't radically changed over the years. First question I have, can you outline what you believe are the key takeaways in this summary of the ICAW's key insights?
So you're right, they haven't changed in a lot of years. In fact, the ICAEW initially produced their cyber report in 2013. And the four high-level categories that you see on this screen are the same four issues that they're looking at today. There has been some improvement, but for the most part, these still remain the issues. And what's really frightening is that the solutions tend to remain the same. And to just run through them really quickly, cyber by design or security by design, it doesn't really matter what you're going to call it, but we still aren't remembering to build security in upfront into our systems, into our processes, and so on. Until we change that mindset, we're never going to win the cyber wars. I think almost everybody is now bought into you will be breached. We all know that. But there are still an awful lot of us who seem to think that if we can just get that right set of technical controls around the outside wall, somehow we can stop the bad stuff from happening. And what you really need to do is realize that while it's important to stop it from happening, at some point they're going to get through, and you need to put as much focus on how you're going to respond to that breach when it happens. Focusing on the crown jewels. I mean, we've all heard the old saying, you can fool some of the people some of the time. Well, I've done a slight take on that. You can protect some of the data all of the time. And if you really think about what the key data sources are and focus on those, your chances of avoiding a really big breach are minimized. and getting the basics right. Now, in the banking industry in general, we are well on top of getting the basics right. What we often forget to do is to check and make sure that all of those controls that we've put in place continue to operate effectively on a day-by-day, week-by-week, month-by-month basis.
So Vicky, sorry, so further to that, where do you believe then, from this analysis, do you believe we can most easily and cost-effectively start moving the needle towards greater resilience against attacks?
Well, and I've said it a couple of times, so it's going to sound a bit repetitive, but it's really about changing the behaviors of your people. Because in order to achieve everything on this slide, it means every single person in the organization, in one way or another, having to think differently about cybersecurity, and at least in part taking some responsibility for helping in the fight against cybercrime.
Okay, great. Thanks, Vicky. So further to that, it seems clear that we need to develop a more balanced approach in developing and sustaining a more effective response to managing the risks we face. The Resilient Best Practice has been developed around 3 underpinning principles, which you've heard this morning. 1, you will be targeted, attacked and compromised, so it's now as important to know how you're going to respond and recover with minimal damage on your reputation and your finances, as it is about protecting and detecting attacks in the first instance. Secondly, resilience, cyber resilience rather than merely security, must be an enterprise-wide response, must be led from the top. This really requires a multidisciplinary response, a collaborative approach, requiring a sort of a common understanding, strategy and language to succeed within that organization. And finally, as you've heard, a significant percentage of the attacks rely on human error. So we do need to provide all our people with that awareness and insight. Vicky, I hope you agree with that overview. How would you sum up the gaps in our approach to effective resilience?
Well, for me, I sum it up in the phrase, no one wins the cyber arms race. Too often, we are so focused on finding that perfect piece of technology, thinking if we have a bigger wall, a higher wall, a better gun, that somehow this is going to make us come out on top. And at the end of the day, it doesn't. There are more criminals than there are good guys. We have to be smarter. We cannot possibly hope to defeat them at their own race. And so what it takes is making sure that the people actually can add to your numbers. So your typical security team makes up probably less than 1% of your organization's headcount. How on earth can you expect that 1% to win against an enemy that their sole purpose is to attack your organization? On the other hand, if you can get everybody in your organization on your security team, all of a sudden, you've got a fighting chance. And I guess the other side of that is, and I've said it before, you really have to focus on response as well. If all you do is focus on prevention, then at some point, when you are hit, everybody's going to be running around like headless chickens. Not to be blowing my own horn, but I mean, this is something I've practiced for a lot of years. Last week, we were hit with a phishing attack. It was a very concerted phishing attack. It took us 3 minutes from the first email coming through the door to shut it down and bring it to a stop. Not because I have a huge, fantastic team or because I have the best technology in the world, but because I've got my staff trained that when they receive anything that looks like a phishing email, they immediately call security. And they did, and as a result, we were able to stop it.
Okay, thanks, Vicky. It's clear that many organisations do need to work harder in influencing and enabling positive change in user behaviours. Some research that was presented and announced last week in the US highlights some of these challenges we face. 80% of US-based companies have suffered a cyber attack in the last 12 months. Nearly 50% of organisations have been hit by ransomware. when asked to rate their security concerns, the decision makers in those organizations said they were concerned or extremely concerned about the following: phishing through email, 67%, malware infiltration through email, 65%, malware infiltration via web browsing, 65%, ransomware, 54%, and phishing through social media, 36%. It's clear from this research that the common link between phishing and ransomware attacks, they have a common point of origin, and that is email. And almost 2/3 of ransomware attacks come from emails, either via email attachments or malicious links. And there are no shortage of examples that we read about in the press. I would suggest that this is the tip of the iceberg. Recent attacks that have been referenced both on in media and in the press. Vicky, would you say that this is the tip of the iceberg that we read about in the press?
Absolutely. I mean, I keep statistics in terms of the number of cyber events that we have each year. And then I also track which of those events actually become incidents. And I'm a relatively small player in the market, and I have had well over 300 events so far this year. It's happening all the time, every day. We've heard the old saying, there are two kinds of CEO in this world, ones who know they've been hacked and ones who are in denial.
Thanks, Vicky. So moving on, so where are we going wrong? We, Exelos and Resilia, we commissioned and published research earlier this year amongst people who are responsible for information security awareness learning in their organizations. Only a minority of executives responsible for that training in organizations, and that was for organizations of more than 500 employees, believe their training is very effective. Whilst 4 in 10 said their training is very effective at providing general awareness of risks, only just over a quarter, 28%, say their efforts are very effective at changing behaviours in relation to information security. And the question I would set any of those people is, if it's not effective at changing behaviours, then I'd have some concerns about why you're doing it in the first instance. When asked how many staff had completed their awareness program, respondents in a quarter of organisations said that no more than 50% of staff had done so. And again, this leads to the need to ensure that your plans, your training and awareness building plans are comprehensive in their scope, and that you're engaging with all your people as much as you can. And finally, the research showed that although 32% of organisations are very confident about the relevance of the training they provide, nearly 2/3 are only fairly confident. So we all know that cyber attacks are now business as usual, and the resulting financial and reputational damage can be significant. So as a result, I think organisations must be more certain that they're engaging their people effectively to better equip them to manage the cyber and information security risks that they face. Vicky, one question for you linked to that. Why do you believe staff learning awareness is often not seen as a priority initiative within organisations?
Well, I think part of the problem is, unlike management training and various other types of training organizations do, cyber awareness tends to fall to the information security team. And the information security team are generally made up of security professionals. And security professionals are not instinctively educators. There are very specific skills that people who choose to become educators learn as they are developing themselves. And it is unusual for your CISO to have that same set of skills. I mean, if they had wanted to be an educator, they'd have been an educator. And so what ends up happening is a lot of the learning, and I'm using that term loosely, that gets delivered tends to be what would be effective for that one individual. And every learner learns differently. And so to have a really effective learning and awareness program, you actually need someone who's got a specialty in education to develop the program for you.
Thanks, Vicky, and that's a good cue to the next slide that talks about why typically, sorry, I'm missing out the second poll question, so over to you, Phil, to ask that.
Okay, second poll question here. How relevant would you say your existing information security awareness training for all staff is to their day-to-day work? So how relevant would you say your existing information security awareness training for all staff is to their day-to-day work? The results should be coming out soon. Okay. Nick? Vicky? So, very relevant, fairly irrelevant, not at all relevant, don't know.
What I take from that is that 75% falls into the fairly irrelevant, not at all relevant, or don't know, and that's a situation that I think is a concern and is something that is echoed so typically across organisations in all sectors, whether they're large, small, or medium, and whether you're in the public sector or the private sector. Do you agree with that, Vicky?
Absolutely. Again, I can't stress how important it is that when designing training and awareness materials that you get an education specialist in to help you with it. Because one of the things that they can help you do is design activities that actually will help people develop the skills and the behaviors that you're looking for, rather than merely just telling them a bunch of facts. We all know lots and lots of facts, but at the end of the day, facts do not change the way we behave.
Thanks, Vicky, and that's a good cue to the next slide, which does talk about the why typically information security awareness programs fail. In my experience, speaking to a number of organisations, the CISOs, the heads of InfoSec across all sectors, it would appear that we're trying to program our people every year in the way that we program computers and expect them to behave as we would with computers, which clearly it doesn't happen. As Vicky's already said, people learn in different ways, and taking that approach just simply doesn't work. Some of the common things that I've seen, which for me undermines the success and the strength of any sort of learning. Companies saying, don't do this, don't do that, to their staff, without providing them with any context of the consequences and the impacts of some of the things they might be doing. It makes them ask the question, well, why should I care? If they don't know the consequences of some of these things, I would suggest those behaviours would continue. Secondly, I see all too many organisations just communicating what the company's information security policy is, and that's not going to change behaviours. And it also makes too many assumptions about what our staff already know. There was some interesting research a couple of months ago that identified that 50% of UK adults don't know what phishing is. Clearly, we all know what phishing is because we're in the industry. But when you're trying to educate and provide learning to all of our people, you need to start from the basis that potentially they don't know about that. And without going into sort of a Janet and John approach, we just need to provide learning that gives a very simple, plain English approach to what phishing is, what the consequences are of a phishing email, some simple sort of tools to identify what a phishing email might look like, and then that simple practical guidance on what to do in the event of seeing one. And as Vicky's just highlighted, those sorts of campaigns and programs throughout the year are really successful, as we've just heard about the recent attack last week. The reliance on that single approach, so typically most learning continues to rely on computer-based training, CBT. As we've heard, different people learn in different ways. So there are a whole range of different ways in which we can communicate and learn. It frustrates me with all the ways in which we now communicate with each other, social media, that we're not using some of those techniques in educating our own people. There's also, for me, too much stick and not enough carrot. Sadly, the culture in many organisations does not encourage individuals or teams to identify, to put their hand up and say, I think I've done something wrong, or I think I can see something going wrong over here. The consequence of doing that in all too many organisations I work with is not potentially a very positive one. Vicky, what's your experience? How would you add to that?
Well, I've said it a number of times. Unfortunately, not everybody has someone who has a specialism in education. I'm one of the few CISOs that I know who actually has done a postgraduate diploma in how to train adults. And I have tried to break down what was 2 years worth of study into, the sort of the 5 things. If you do these 5 things, then you've got a chance of succeeding. And this applies not just to training and awareness, but really to any time you're communicating with someone else and trying to impart information. The first thing you need to do is make sure that the training that you're providing is desirable. And that means desirable to the learner. And that's because people learn because they want to, not because they have to. So that annual training that they have to do really is starting out at a deficit already, because it doesn't take into account any sort of desire on the part of the learner. It needs to be focused. Too often our awareness programs, we try to hit everything in one fell swoop. I call it the scattergun approach. Not sure if anybody listening remembers playing something called Kim's game when you were a child, where somebody put 25 objects on the table and had you look at them for a minute and then covered them up, and you had to see how many you could remember, and nobody ever remembered more than 3 or 4 of them. When you use the scattergun approach to training, what you do is you dilute your message. Only 1 or 2 of the things that you're saying will stick with the person. The other thing you have to do is make sure that you're presenting material in a variety of different ways. We can't just keep doing the same thing over and over and expect the results to be different. I believe it was Einstein who said that was the definition of insanity. You've really got to look at all different ways of appealing to people and use that spectrum of ways over the course of the years, months, whatever. Training has to be a small piece of drama or theater. It has to be compelling to the person who's doing it. If they don't look at that and see something that they're interested in, something that they can answer the question for themselves, what's in it for me, they're unlikely to learn. If you think of things like ghost stories and oral histories, you'll get a sense of what I mean by being compelling and having that sense of drama and theater. And finally, it has to be engaging. Learners don't learn unless they are actively engaged in their own learning. So sitting back passively and reading something is less likely to be effective than getting them to lean forward and do something.
Thanks, Vicky. The importance of storytelling we'll come back to at the end of the presentation. One of the things I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation was the important role, the critical role that the board needs to play in setting the right tone from the top, and that goes as much around the learning and training that we're talking about this morning as it is about the whole cyber resilience strategy. One of my frustrations is the language that we use in the cyber industry. It's typically hugely technical. It's full of 3-letter acronyms, and for me, that takes the agenda away from most people in the street and most of the people that work in our organizations. They believe it's out of their grasp to understand, though in reality, what they need is this simple, practical guidance and advice to help them make those right decisions. Vicky, do you agree with that? And how do you believe we can better tackle the language barrier between the technology teams, the boards, and all our people to make our people more effective?
Well, I think one of the ways to tackle it is to remember that language is not the only way of teaching people. Really, we're talking about changing behaviors. And so what you want them to do is essentially come to the learning on their own. I ran something that I called a fishing contest a few years ago that was really, really successful, and I still get the rewards from today, where I had people for an entire month send me the phishing emails they received, either at work or at home. I didn't care where they got them, but for every phishing email that they sent me, I gave them a raffle ticket for, and I'm putting this in air quotes, a security blanket. It was a beautiful handmade quilt and was highly desirable, so everybody was quite interested in finding phishing emails and sending them to me. Well, at the end of the month, okay, somebody got a nice prize, but what I got was an entire workforce who knew how to identify a phishing email, and when they did, were pre-programmed to send it to me, which is exactly what I wanted to happen in terms of the response to this day. If somebody gets a phishing email, I want them to call security.
And Vicky, what's your experience in communicating these sorts of risks, the people risks, to boards? Do boards typically understand this message?
So my board does. I don't know if they're more switched on than other boards. I rather doubt that that's the case. I try to keep my comments to the board straightforward and to the point. I don't talk technical to them. They're not interested in what kind of widgets I've installed this month. And I only ever give them one statistic. And it's the one I gave all of you earlier. I tell them how many events that we've had and how many of those events turned into incidents. And they all know that we have a less than 18% conversion rate of events to incidents, and that conversion rate has been coming down over the years. So they can understand in a way that makes sense to them that the protections they're putting in place are working. Despite the fact that cybercrime is increasing exponentially, the amount that it's impacting us is going down.
Thanks, Vicky. So in summary, here's a slide showing some of the screenshots of some of the learning that Resilia has developed. You'll see that there's no common look and feel. That's quite deliberate. It provides variety for different people. There's games, simulations, there's animations, and there's traditional e-learning and posters to enable any sort of organization to design and manage their most effective campaign through the year. Some thoughts that I would like to highlight in summary, some of the sort of five guiding principles that hopefully reflect what Vicky and I have been saying. One, people pay attention to leaders. Getting the buy-in and involvement of those at the top of your organizations is really critical and can highlight the positive benefits of resilient behaviors. There needs to be more reward and inspiration from the board and to show how seriously that leadership team is committed to protecting their most sensitive and precious information. Secondly, as we've said, memories are fragile. Doing training once a year is ineffective in managing and changing and sustaining behavior change. So plan to reinforce, refresh and evolve. And as we all know, risks change very regularly. 18 months ago, we weren't talking about ransomware or CEO scam emails as much as we are now. So make sure that your learning brings people up to date with some of these latest challenges that they face, and combine both online and offline activities. So I know Vicky hosts live events, competitions, surveys, lunch and learn sessions to just build that team spirit and that cultural change. Thirdly, people do learn differently. So you do need to build into your program a lively mix of different formats to use to obtain the same learning outcomes. So as you've seen from that slide, as I say, there are games, animation, simulations to immerse the learner in scenarios to make them take decisions and see the consequences of those decisions. Fourthly, use every means at your disposal. So stay agile, always adapt and fine-tune your programs. And as Vicky's highlighted, involve your people not just in the learning, but in the design of that learning. Actively involve them. Find the champions across your organization to help guide and influence that learning, what that learning looks like. And finally, people do remember stories over facts. There's all too many facts and stats around cyber resilience and cyber security. As part of that campaign, to be most successful, fix a message in the minds of your learners. Appeal to their hearts. The best marketing campaigns we all see have a truly great story to tell. And on that, I'd like to finish off with something that we've done at Resilia on that understanding, is that coming back to the board and their involvement and their potential lack of engagement and understanding, we've written a short thriller. So in my experience, when I was working at BAE Systems previous to Axelos, I'd spent 11 years there helping build the cyber team and responsible for market engagement. And I spent a lot of time talking with the C-suite, talking with non-exec directors, the board, and it was clear to me that these guys love storytelling. They love anecdotes and narrative. So we commissioned an author, and he's written a short story thriller called Waiting for Beginners, which provides that emotional engagement to the people at the top of organizations. It's a story of a chief exec of a US organization, mid-sized organization, and it takes you through the stark realization that he has one day when he understands that something that he did through a relatively sophisticated whaling attack on him, the impact of that, not just on him, his company and his staff, but also on his biggest customers, because the attack was simply a route through him into some of the very large organizations that he did business with. It's a great book. We've just launched book 2, which takes the story forward to when the breach goes public, and it just shows some of the challenges and problems that any organization will have in responding effectively, and when you start losing control of the agenda if you're not careful. So Vicky, have you got any final thoughts on that or on anything that we've said before we conclude?
Nick, I couldn't have said it any better than you just did.
Thank you, Vicky. So I think that concludes it from Vicky and I, but there is one final question which I'll hand you over to Phil on.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and thanks, Vicky, for your inputs there. We certainly are taking this seriously, like Nick is saying, and we've raised our game in terms of what we can offer bank members and regulated firms in terms of education and understanding. And Cyber Resilience Week, CyRes Week, kicks off on the 7th of November. Nick and others are participants in that and have helped build a fantastic program. Many of the workshops, if not all of the workshops, the conference, and also the webinars in that week are freely available for all our BBA bank members. And so I would encourage your staff, yourselves on this call, and also colleagues who are in the C-suite, as Nick has said, to participate in that. Furthermore, in partnership with Axelos, we have a opportunity to present and to deliver to bank members and regulated firms the opportunity of sharing what Nick and Vicky have been sharing, and that is the opportunity of getting free access to e-learning modules there. So if you'd like to tick yes or no whether you'd like to review BBA's suite of cyber resilience e-learning, please click on that and we'll get through, we'll make sure that that is sent to you and we'll engage with you straight away on that. It's a great tool for you to be able to socialize and raise the bar, and that's what we've been talking about, raising the bar here. It's very interesting for us because this dovetails into much of the training that we're doing on senior managers regime, whereby obviously the senior managers are now accountable in a greater way than they've ever been before for the culture and the conduct of the organisation. And it's important that they prove that that the firm has taken, in front of the regulator, the firm has taken reasonable steps to prevent what has happened or what could happen, and making sure that they've got robust controls in place and right operations and systems in place. And I think that absolutely dovetails into what Nick and Vicky have been saying there. So if you do have any questions, please do let us know and file those questions in now. If you don't, the contact details for both Nick and Vicky are available on the screen now. What we will do is that we'll also make sure that this is available on demand by the close of play today. So again, you can socialize this amongst colleagues, and we'll push that out. Also, if we could make the slide deck in a PDF version available to those people who haven't been able to participate but have registered for this as well, that would be great. Any final thoughts, Nick, from yourself?
Final thought from me is learning like this is massively cost effective in comparison with the cost of some technologies. It's a massively cost effective approach. There are better ways to do the learning that most organizations are typically focused on. So if you're interested, we would love to talk to you. Vicky, have you got any other final thoughts?
I guess I would give one final tip, which is, in addition to changing behaviors and training people on how to do it right, be sure that your training also includes what to do when they get it wrong. At the end of the day, people make mistakes. They are not going to get it right 100% of the time, no matter how often you train them. And so making sure that there is a way for them to recover is absolutely critically important.
But that, Vicky, doesn't that suggest that you have to have a type of culture within your organisation to allow for mistakes to happen, and that the recognition that breaches will happen on your watch, no matter how robust your systems are, no matter how much the board has signed off on X, Y, and Z system or software, or even e-learning suite, educational suite, that there has to be that risk culture that is positive and proactive, and recognizing that continuous improvement is a way forward.
Absolutely, that goes a long way to getting to that place. If we're sending the right message to our senior execs and our boards, we're telling them breaches are going to happen. It doesn't matter how good we get. Stuff is going to be breached. Response is key. And that comes right down to the individual. So we've got to remember that it's not just at a macro level, but also at a micro level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And do people in the board accept that, that sometimes mistakes and failures will happen? Is that an acceptance in cultures of firms that you've worked for in the past and peers that you work for?
If I was going to be completely honest, I would say it sort of depends on how big the mistake is. And that's why it's important that people know what to do when it goes wrong. So if you get a phishing email and you click on the link and you call somebody right away to fix it, it's unlikely to become a big problem. On the other hand, if you get the phishing email, click on the link, and hope it goes away, it can become a massive problem. And so I always encourage my people to report the issues as soon as possible, because when it's small, we can fix it. The bigger it gets, the less likely it is that it can be fixed. And in terms of an organization's tolerance for mistakes, they tend to be much more tolerant of small mistakes than big mistakes.
Phil, further to that, a little story I present over in the US at a number of conferences through the year, and I've shared the platform 3 times with the CISO of one of the very largest US retail banks. The last time we presented, he was telling a story of him presenting at his to the board and his monthly presentation to the board, and he was not getting the response and the support that he felt he needed to sort of get to the next stage of development. So he went in and he just gave them 2 multiple choice questions. The first one was, very simply, how many phishing emails do you believe we as a bank receive every month? None of the board directors got it right. The answer was 40 million, which for anybody in the banking industry probably won't come as a surprise, because it just shows the scale and industrialization of the risks that we face. The second question was the punchline, which was, how many of those do you believe bypass the hundreds of millions of dollars investment that we've made in technology and gets to all of our people on the front line? And the answer was seemingly quite small. It was 1%, but that's 4,000 separate attacks getting to everyone on the front line. And as he said, the attackers only need to be lucky once, and we need to be lucky all the time. It's not going to happen. So this is where response is absolutely critical. And playing back to what Vicky was saying, one of his biggest roles is making sure that as and when an attack becomes an incident, that his job is to identify that as quickly as possible. And what he wanted to do what is happening is that he is engaging all of his people in making that work more effectively.
Fantastic, great story as well, and I think it's well noted. I can't see you, but I think there's a few nodding heads out there in recognition. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Vicky. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Nick. Nick will be participative in CIRES Week, which is only a week and a half away. Now, I encourage you to attend the forthcoming webinars and workshops within that week, and also if you need any help or support on the e-learning, together with Axelos, we'll be more than happy to help you. Thank you very much for your time today, and have a great day.